Hello, I'm pleased to present some information today on NEH's Digital Humanities Advancement Grant Program. This webinar will cover both deadline dates for the 2023 cycle. In this webinar, I will give an overview of the program, including a discussion of the program's priorities, funding statistics, important dates, and eligibility. I will then provide some information about planning and writing your application while discussing the program's review criteria and sharing some tips and reminders. I will then outline the NEH review process. At the end of the webinar, I'll share some additional resources and contact information. NEH's Office of Digital Humanities has offered the Digital Humanities Advancement Grant, or DHAG, program since 2017. The Institute of Museum and Library Services is a partner on this grant program. IMLS funding allows us to fund DHAG projects that advance, support, and empower America's libraries, archives, museums, and related organizations. The overarching goal of this program is to support innovative, experimental, and/or computationally challenging digital projects, leading to work that can scale to enhance scholarly research, teaching, and public programming in the humanities. What sets this program apart from others at NEH that can support digital projects is the focus on innovation and experimentation. If your project is using established tools and methods, or is focused on perhaps digitizing a collection or creating a digital platform to share information, it might be a better fit for another program. ODH staff have prepared a series of resources intended to help applicants find the best fit for their digital projects. That set of resources can be accessed by clicking the link here. Turning to eligibility, DHAG makes awards to institutions rather than to individuals. Awardee institutions must be in the United States or one of its jurisdictions and be a nonprofit organization recognized as tax exempt under Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code, an accredited institution of higher education, either public or nonprofit, a state or local government or one of their agencies, or a federally recognized Native American tribal government. An individual may serve as a project director or PD or a co-PD on only one DHAG application per deadline and may not submit identical applications or applications with significant overlap to multiple NEH programs at the same time. You will see that we offer 3 different funding levels for this program. I will discuss those in more detail when looking at the Notice of Funding Opportunity. The next application deadline is January 12, 2023. This means that your application must be submitted through grants.gov by 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time on that date. If you have not used grants.gov previously, you will need to ensure that you have created registrations and passwords for both sam.gov and grants.gov. And if you have used grants.gov before, you are advised to make sure your registration is up to date and that you can log in. We offer 2 funding deadlines each year, typically in January and June. So if you do not feel ready to submit by an upcoming deadline, you do have the option of planning an application for the following one. Another important date shown here is the deadline to submit an optional draft for program officer feedback. For the January deadline, this is on November 14, 2022, and for the June deadline, this will be on April 17, 2023. To submit a draft, we ask that you send a narrative, preliminary work plan, and/or preliminary budget as a single attachment, so just one file, to odh@neh.gov. In the body of the email, indicate the proposed funding level, lead project director, institution name, and preliminary title for your project. Scrolling to the bottom of the DHAG landing page, you'll see some program statistics. In the 11 rounds of funding to date, our overall success ratio is about 17%. For 2023, we anticipate making about 12 to 15 awards per deadline, with roughly $2.2 million in funding at each deadline. At this point, I'd like to draw your attention to the Notice of Funding Opportunity, or NOFO, as most of the information I will be sharing is taken from this document. The specific program priorities appear on page 1 of the NOFO. The priorities are to support projects that fall into one of 3 categories: research and refinement of innovative, experimental, or computationally challenging methods and techniques, enhancement or design of digital infrastructure that contributes to and supports the humanities, such as open source code, tools or platforms, and evaluative studies that investigate the practices and the impact of digital scholarship on research, pedagogy, scholarly communication, and public engagement. Below the bulleted list of program priorities in the NOFO is a paragraph that stresses the importance of experimentation, reuse, and extensibility. Through the DHAG program, we ideally want to fund projects that have an impact well beyond a single institution or single discipline. If you have looked at the DHAG NOFO previously, you might notice that we have removed language for the 2023 application dates about supporting projects that examine the history, criticism, ethics, or philosophy of digital culture or technology and its impact on society. We are temporarily suspending support for such projects through DHAG, as ODH has a new program called Dangers and Opportunities of Technology, Perspectives from the Humanities. This program is designed to fund those sorts of projects. This program has a deadline of February 2, 2023. On page 31 of the NOFO, there is a list of funding restrictions. We suggest prospective applicants review this list early in the proposal development process to ensure that your project is a clear fit for this particular program. You'll see that the first item on this list prohibits funding for projects that mainly involve digitization unless you propose an innovative method for digitization. The second item restricts funding for projects that primarily develop humanities content for websites, mobile applications, games, and virtual environments, unless you propose innovative methods or are developing new technologies. If your project falls into one of these categories or another on this list, you'll likely want to consider another program, either at NEH or another funding organization. If you've determined that DHAG is indeed the best fit for your project, the next step is to determine the appropriate funding level. We have 3 funding levels designed to give you some flexibility based on the scope and maturity of your project. The discussion of funding levels starts on page 1 of the NOFO. Level 1 is appropriate for smaller projects or those at an earlier stage of a larger project, where you might use funding to bring together people to scope out a research agenda or map out the next steps for your project. Level 1 funding can also be used to develop experimental alpha level prototypes. We've increased the amount of funding available for level 1 projects recently from $50,000 to $75,000. Level 1 projects can have a duration or period of performance of up to 2 years. You can see the types of activities that are appropriate for level 1 funding on this slide and also in the NOFO. Level 2 is for projects that have completed an initial planning phase and are poised to scale up based on prior research and development. These projects can range between $75,000 and $150,000 and also have periods of performance of up to 2 years. Finally, level 3 funding is to allow the scaling up and expansion of more mature projects with established user bases. Successful level 3 projects must have robust dissemination plans beyond the applicant institution and include a formal sustainability plan. This plan should discuss the project's long-term financial needs and demonstrate how it will continue to meet its goals after the period of performance. Applicants at the level 3 stage can request between $150,000 to $350,000 and have a period of performance of up to 3 years. Level 3 applicants may request up to an additional $50,000 in federal matching funds for a total award of up to $400,000 to leverage external funding to support digital initiatives and ensure long-term sustainability of digital projects. Once you've identified the appropriate funding level for your project, you may wish to turn to the application component table on page 9 of the NOFO, which you can use as a checklist as you're preparing the different sections of your application. This tells you whether a particular section is required, recommended, or conditionally required, and specifies any page or paragraph limits. The main text of your application is called the narrative. You'll see that the page limit varies by funding level. In addition to the narrative, the other required attachments are a list of personnel where you list all key project personnel, their titles and institutional affiliations, if any, and their role in the project. We ask that you clearly identify the project director and any co-project directors in this list and include the names of advisory board members, if any. You must also submit a work plan, a set of 1-paragraph biographies for all key project personnel, and a data management plan. If you are submitting a level 3 application, you must submit a sustainability plan as well. There are 6 required sections that make up the narrative. These are overview of the project, enhancing the humanities, environmental scan, history of the project, activities and project team, and final products and dissemination. In this table, which appears on page 12 of the NOFO, we show which of the review criteria correspond with which section of the narrative. Turning to the program's 6 review criteria, these appear on pages 32 to 33 of the NOFO. These are the criteria that external peer reviewers will apply when reading and evaluating your application. I'll go through all of these and provide some additional guidance for each one. The first review criterion is the clarity of the project's goals and significance and impact for the humanities. The sections of your application that should speak to this most directly are the overview of the project, enhancing the humanities, and final products and dissemination. In the NOFO, you can see the questions that reviewers will be asked to answer in preparing their comments. It is in your interest to state clearly what you plan to do during the period of performance and identify your project's proposed outcomes. Explain how your proposed activities will advance research, teaching, and learning in the humanities. Identify your intended users or audiences and detail your dissemination and outreach plans for reaching these communities, and describe the impact of your project. The second review criterion is the quality of the overall conception, organization, and description of how the proposed work fits within a broader context, and quality of the argument for new or further work in this area. To ensure you rate highly for this criterion, you will want to document and discuss related projects and identify how your project addresses a gap in the literature or research and moves one or more fields forward. Number 3 is the feasibility and appropriateness of the activities, work plan, methodology, and use of technology, and the project's plans for mitigating risks and addressing accessibility for its intended audience. Some tips related to this are to ensure the activities and project team section and the work plan attachment are clear and detailed, create a realistic timeline, and discuss potential risks and risk mitigation strategies. Discuss how your proposed methods and technologies will allow you to accomplish your project's goals, and detail strategies for ensuring your products are accessible for your intended audiences. Number 4 is the qualifications, expertise, and levels of commitment of the project director and key project staff or contributors. Here, you will want to explain the role of each team member and document how that person's background and training makes them a good fit for the project. Ensure each team member is appropriately credited for their contributions, and if your project includes early career or contingent staff, students, or interns, that they are receiving adequate mentorship or professional development opportunities. And finally, describe strategies for recruiting people with appropriate skills when roles are identified without a named staff member. Number 5 is the reasonableness of the proposed budget in relation to the proposed activities, staff compensation, the anticipated results, products, and dissemination. It will be in your interest to make sure that the budget and budget justification align with the goals and activities outlined in the narrative. Set aside adequate resources for team members commensurate with their contributions to the project, and explain how the lead institution will manage any technical assets or infrastructure if the project includes subrecipients, contracts, or consultants. Finally, the sixth review criterion is the quality and appropriateness of project plans for data management and, if applicable, sustainability. Here, you will want to articulate the types of data you expect to produce, discuss plans for managing the data, including beyond the period of performance, and for level 3 projects, demonstrate an understanding of the project's long-term needs and develop sufficient plans to ensure the sustainability of the project. At this point, I'll cover a few general tips. You'll want your application to be clear and concise. Be sure that someone not familiar with your project can figure out what it is you want to do within the first paragraph. You'll want to avoid jargon and overly technical language. We suggest that you write for a fairly broad audience, given that the peer review panel will likely be composed of some humanities scholars in your field, but also some outside your field, as well as computer and information scientists, librarians, archivists, and other humanities professionals. The various sections of your application should all be aligned and tell the same story. If reviewers get to the budget and discover an entry for a workshop or a piece of equipment that has not been discussed anywhere in the narrative, this will likely be a source of confusion. Similarly, if the success of your project depends on having a team member with certain expertise and that person's one paragraph bio does not reflect that, reviewers may have questions as to whether the team is well positioned to complete the proposed activities. We always encourage potential applicants to start the process earlier than you think you need to, and to work closely with your Office of Sponsored Research or equivalent office, as the person serving as the Institutional Grant Administrator, or IGA, will be providing a lot of the key information on the application and will actually submit the application via grants.gov. Finally, it can be helpful, especially for returning applicants, to review the What's New and Reminders section of the program resource page. This is where we flag up important changes we have made in updating the NOFO and other materials. The review process for DHAG follows a similar timeline as most other NEH grant programs. The process starts when an applicant begins preparing a proposal and then submits it using grants.gov by the program deadline. Once NEH staff have ensured applications are eligible, complete, and compliant, we assign them to panels and assemble a peer review panel, typically with 5 members. After the panel, NEH staff identify which proposals will be recommended for funding based on peer review input and the amount of funding available. All of the recommended applications across NEH then go to the NEH National Council on the Humanities, which meets 3 times a year, typically in March, July, and November. After the council meeting, the NEH chair makes final funding decisions. The final step is notifying applicants as to whether their projects will be funded. In terms of additional resources, I mentioned the resource page that ODH staff created earlier. Here, you can find a variety of videos, blog posts, and other documents to help you find the best programmatic fit for your digital projects. Another option is to review our FAQ and sample narratives from successful applications. We have a number of samples available at each of the funding levels. You can also review the NEH database of funded projects. Here you can search by keyword, program, project director name, institution, among other search options. This is a great way to surface projects you might not have known about and can be especially helpful when preparing your environmental scan. Finally, you can reach out to a program officer. The contact information for the Office of Digital Humanities is shown here. Staff in ODH and elsewhere at NEH are happy to help you find the best fit for your project and answer any questions you might have. With that, I will thank you for your time and attention and wish you the best of luck as you develop your project.